The silence was the first thing that struck him. It was a dense, unnatural quiet, the kind that settles in a space where noise should be. Liam Keene stood in the doorway of the small apartment he and Chloe had called home, the scent of his own workday, diesel fumes, sweat, and the sharp bite of cut steel clinging to him like a second skin. The air inside should have smelled of Chloe's floral perfume, or the chicken she'd promised to roast. Instead, it smelled of nothing. It was a vacuum. He dropped his heavy tool belt by the door, the clatter of hammers and wrenches echoing with obscene loudness in the stillness. He walked through the cramped living room, his steel-toed boots leaving dusty footprints on the worn laminate flooring. Everything was too tidy. The stack of magazines Chloe always left on the coffee table was gone. The throw pillows were arranged with a geometric precision she never bothered with. A cold knot began to form in the pit of his stomach, a dense ball of dread that felt like wet concrete. On the kitchen counter, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light, sat her wedding ring. Next to it, a single folded piece of paper. The cruelty of the placement was surgical. The ring, a simple gold band he had saved for 6 months to buy, was left like a tip for services no longer rendered. His hands, calloused and ingrained with the grime of a dozen construction sites, felt clumsy and huge as he reached for the note. His fingers trembled, a weakness he despised. The handwriting was Chloe's, a looping, optimistic script that had always seemed at odds with her growing discontent. The words, however, were brutally direct. "Liam, I can't do this anymore. This life, this place, it's not enough. It was never going to be enough. Daniel can give me the life I deserve. He always could have. I'm sorry, don't try to find me. Daniel, his brother." The name hit him not like a punch, but like a structural failure, the shearing of a support beam deep inside him. Daniel, with his easy smile, his tailored suits, and his vague but lucrative job in finance. Daniel, who had clapped him on the back at their wedding and called him the luckiest man alive. The concrete in his gut hardened, solidified, and began to crack. He read the line again. He always could have. It wasn't just a departure. It was a judgment, a final, damning verdict on his entire existence. Then a new, colder horror washed over him, eclipsing the betrayal. Lily, their 4-year-old daughter. He stumbled toward the small bedroom at the end of the hall, his heart hammering against his ribs like a runaway piston. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, his breath catching in his throat. There she was. Asleep in her toddler bed, a small lump under a pink comforter, her breathing a soft, rhythmic whisper. A stuffed rabbit was clutched in her hand. Chloe had not taken her. She had left her behind like the ring, another part of a life she had shed. The relief that flooded him was so immense it was nauseating, but it was immediately followed by a wave of pure cold fury. How could she walk away from this perfect, tiny person? The abandonment was no longer just about him. It was a crime against this innocent life. He backed out of the room, pulling the door quietly shut. The apartment, once a home, now felt like a cage, a wreckage site. He stood in the silent living room, the note still clutched in his hand. The paper was becoming soft and pulpy from the sweat on his palm. His mind was a storm of noise now, a cacophony of memories and imagined conversations. Chloe complaining about the noise from the elevated train. Daniel laughing about a bad investment he'd turned into a windfall. Chloe looking at a brochure for a Caribbean cruise, her eyes full of a longing he knew he couldn't satisfy, not yet. He had always said just, "Give me time, Chloe, I'm building us a future." He had believed it. He had believed the blueprints of their life were sound. He just needed to put in the work, pour the foundation, frame the walls. He was a builder. It was what he did. He had been building on sand, No, he had been building on a fault line, and his own brother had triggered the quake. With a mechanical calmness that frightened him, he pulled his phone from his pocket. His thumb hovered over Daniel's contact photo, the two of them at a baseball game years ago, grinning, impossibly young. He pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice. "Liam, what's up?" Daniel's voice was smooth, casual. The sound of it was a physical irritant, like fiberglass on bare skin. Liam couldn't form a sentence. He could only manage a single, guttural word. "Why?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a confused pause, a calculating one. He could hear the faint sound of music, something jazzy. He could picture the scene, a high-rise apartment with a view of the city lights, a glass of expensive whiskey, Chloe at his side. "Look, little brother," Daniel began, his tone shifting from casual to condescendingly placating. "It's just how it is. Some people are meant for more. Chloe, she needs a certain kind of life, a life you can't give her. It wasn't malicious, it was just inevitable." "She left Lily," Liam said, his voice flat, dead. Another pause, this one longer. "Yeah, well, that's complicated," Daniel said, a flicker of something, annoyance, discomfort, in his tone. Chloe felt it was better for Lily to have stability, for now. We'll work out the details later. It's for the best, Liam, you'll see. For the best. The words hung in the dead air of the apartment. Liam looked at the note, at the ring, at the closed door to his daughter's room. He saw the future he had been building crumble into dust, leaving only rebar and ruin. He ended the call without another word. He slid down the wall, his back scraping against the drywall, until he was sitting on the floor. He sat there for a long time as the city outside darkened and the streetlights cast long, lonely shadows into the room. The silence returned, deeper this time, heavier. It was the silence of a tomb. He was a builder, and his world had just been condemned. He had no idea how to start again. He only knew he had to, for the small, sleeping girl in the other room. He was her foundation now. He could not, would not, break. If stories about resilience, the price of loyalty, and the kind of love that survives the wreckage, speak to you, stay with me. The first few weeks were a blur of numb autopilot. Liam moved through his life like a ghost, haunting the edges of his own tragedy. He got up before dawn, the cold floor a shock to his system. He learned the delicate, clumsy art of brushing a 4-year-old's hair, his thick, calloused fingers struggling with the fine strands. He made toast that was always a little too burnt and poured cereal that was a little too sugary. He walked Lily to the small daycare near their apartment building, her tiny hand lost in his, a fragile connection to a world that still had color and warmth. Then he would go to work. The construction site was both a torment and a salvation. It was a torment because every structure, every blueprint, every length of steel was a reminder of what he had failed to build at home. But it was a salvation because the work was brutally physical and demanded absolute focus. You couldn't dwell on a broken heart when you were balancing on a high steel beam, the wind threatening to rip you from your perch. You couldn't ruminate on betrayal when you were guiding a multi-ton crane lift into place, a mistake measured in inches and catastrophic consequences. He threw himself into the labor, welcoming the exhaustion, the aches, the pain. It was a clean, honest hurt, a stark contrast to the septic wound in his chest. His boss, Frank, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and whose hands were as tough as old leather, watched him with narrowed, knowing eyes. Frank had run his own construction company for 40 years, and he could read men better than he could read blueprints. He saw the new hollowness in Liam's eyes, the way he worked with a frantic, desperate energy, pushing past the point of normal exhaustion. One afternoon, Frank found Liam sitting alone during the lunch break, staring blankly at an uneaten sandwich. "Keen," Frank said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer platitudes. He just sat down on the overturned bucket next to him and unwrapped his own sandwich. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the air filled with the sounds of the city and the clang of distant work. "Wife left me," Liam said finally, the words tasting like rust in his mouth. "For my brother." Frank chewed his pastrami on rye slowly, his gaze fixed on the skeletal frame of the building they were erecting. "Men do stupid things for women," he grunted, "and women do stupid things for money, or the idea of it. It's an old story." He took another bite. "You got kids?" "A daughter, Lily. She's 4. Frank nodded, a flicker of something softer in his eyes. "That's not an old story. That's a new one. Your new one." He finished his sandwich, wadded up the wax paper, and stood, his joints cracking in protest. "The overtime shift on the foundation pour this weekend. I need a man I can count on not to have his head up his ass." "You in?" "I'm in," Liam said without hesitation. It was more than just extra pay. It was a lifeline, a vote of confidence, a reason to keep his head screwed on straight. But the days were long, and the nights were longer. The apartment remained a hostile zone, a constant physical reminder of Chloe. Her scent lingered faintly in the closet. A half-used bottle of her expensive shampoo still sat in the shower. Each object was a small, sharp barb. The mess began to pile up. Dishes in the sink, laundry in the corner, Lily's toys scattered across the floor. He was too tired to clean, too overwhelmed to care. He was treading water in a sea of his own despair, and the shore was nowhere in sight. The anxiety was a low hum beneath the surface of everything, the fear that he would fail at this too, that he wasn't enough for his daughter, that Chloe and Daniel had been right. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. It had rained all day, a cold, miserable downpour that had turned the construction site into a sea of mud and chilled him to the bone. The subway was delayed. He was late picking up Lily from daycare, and the look of disapproval on the caregiver's face was another small cut. He carried a tired, whiny Lily home through the rain, his own clothes soaked through. The apartment was cold and dark. He juggled the squirming child, the grocery bag, and the keys, finally managing to get the door open. He was exhausted. Every muscle screamed. His head throbbed. All he wanted was to feed his daughter, put her to bed, and fall into a dreamless sleep. He set about making her a bottle of warm milk, a comfort she still clung to at bedtime. He moved with the leaden slowness of a man at the end of his rope. His hands, stiff and cold, fumbled with the glass bottle as he poured the milk. And it slipped. The bottle cartwheeled through the air in what felt like slow motion before shattering on the linoleum floor. White milk and shards of glass sprayed across the grimy surface. It was a small thing, a stupid, mundane accident. But in that moment, it was everything. It was the final, crushing weight on a structure that was already about to collapse. Liam stared at the mess, the spilled milk, the broken glass, a perfect metaphor for his life. A sob, raw and ugly, tore its way out of his throat. It was a sound he didn't recognize, the strength he had been clinging to, the stoic facade he had maintained for weeks. It all crumbled. He sank to his knees in the middle of the kitchen, the rough edges of the broken glass pressing into his jeans. He put his head in his hands and wept, not quiet, dignified tears, but wrenching, body-shaking sobs of grief and failure and rage and utter, bottomless despair. He had hit rock bottom. The concrete floor was cold and hard beneath him, and he had nothing left to break. He didn't know how long he stayed there, a broken man on a broken floor. It was the touch of a small hand on his wet cheek that finally pierced the fog of his misery. He looked up. Lily stood before him, her eyes wide with a concern no 4-year-old should have to feel. She wasn't crying. She was just watching him, her expression one of profound, simple love. In her other hand she held her stuffed rabbit, its button eyes seeming to stare at him with solemn judgment. She held it out to him, an offering. Something inside Liam shifted. It was a tectonic movement, deep and profound. He looked at his daughter, this small, resilient person who had lost her mother and was now faced with a father who was falling apart. He saw the implicit trust in her eyes. He was her whole world, her foundation, her shelter from the storm, and here he was, kneeling in the wreckage, letting the storm in. No more. The decision was not a thought, but a vow, a line drawn in the dirt. He would not sink. He would not be this man. He would not let the poison of Chloe's and Daniel's betrayal seep into this last precious thing he had. Revenge was a hollow structure, but a fortress, a home, a future for his daughter. That was something a builder could create. He took a shuddering breath and gently took the stuffed rabbit from her hand. He pulled her into a fierce hug, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the simple, clean scent of her. "I'm okay, Sweet Pea," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Daddy's okay. We're going to be okay." That night, after Lily was safely asleep, Liam didn't collapse. He started to build. He began not with steel and concrete, but with a trash bag and a broom. He carefully swept up the broken glass and mopped the floor until it shone. He washed every dish in the sink. He gathered the laundry. He went through the apartment and methodically, ruthlessly purged every last trace of Chloe. Her clothes, her books, her half-empty bottle of shampoo. He packed it all into boxes. He didn't do it with anger, but with the dispassionate focus of a demolition expert clearing a site for new construction. When he was done, he took her wedding ring from the counter and dropped it into the last box. He sealed it with tape and hauled it all down to the curb. The next day, he walked into Frank's dusty, cluttered site office. "Frank," he said, his voice clear and steady for the first time in weeks. "That overtime you mentioned, I'll take all of it. Every hour you've got." Frank looked up from a schematic, his expression unreadable. "You sure you can handle it, Keen?" "I can handle it," Liam said. "And one more thing, I saw a flyer for a night course at the community college, construction management and architectural drafting. I'm signing up." A slow smile spread across Frank's weathered face. He nodded, a deep and satisfying approval in the gesture. "About damn time," he said. "I was wondering when you were going to start building again." It was in one of those night classes surrounded by the smell of graphite and paper and the low hum of overworked minds that he properly met Isla Serrano. He had seen her on site a few times. She was one of the architects from the firm contracted for their current high-rise project. On site, she was a whirlwind of brisk efficiency, her hard hat pulled low, her face usually smudged with dust, pointing out discrepancies between the blueprints and the reality with a sharp, uncompromising eye. She seemed to exist in a world of precise angles and stress tolerances, a world away from his own of sweat and brute force. In the classroom, she was different. Still focused, but softer around the edges. She was there not as a teacher, but as a student, taking an advanced course in sustainable materials. They sat near each other. He was acutely aware of her presence, the quiet intensity with which she absorbed information, the way she would chew on the end of her pen when grappling with a complex concept. Their first real conversation was an argument. The instructor was lecturing on modern foundation techniques. Liam, drawing from a decade of practical hands-on experience, raised his hand and politely pointed out a flaw in the textbook theory, a real-world complication the book didn't account for. Isla turned in her seat and countered his point with a complex engineering principle, citing a study he'd never heard of. They went back and forth, a volley of practicality versus theory. The rest of the class watched, rapt. It wasn't hostile. It was a debate between two people who were passionate about the same thing, making things that last. After class, she waited for him by the door. "You were right," she said, her tone direct, without a hint of ego. "About the soil displacement, the study I quoted didn't account for the specific type of aggregate we use here. I checked the geotech reports for the Harrison Tower project during the break. You have good instincts, Keene." "You have good data, Serrano," he replied, a small smile touching his lips. "Maybe they're both useful." "Maybe they are," she said, her own smile appearing for a moment. It transformed her face, taking her from intimidatingly competent to simply beautiful. "I've seen your work on site. You're clean. Your team's concrete pours are flawless." It was the highest form of compliment one could receive in his world. "We try," he said, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the stuffy hallway. That was the beginning. Their conversation started in the classroom and spilled over into late-night coffee after class. She would talk about the elegance of a perfectly designed load-bearing wall, and he would talk about the feel of the concrete as it cured, the way you could sense its strength. She saw the intelligence behind his calloused hands. He saw the practical, grounded soul behind her academic theories. She never asked about his personal life, and he never offered. But one night, he was late for class, arriving flustered and apologizing. "My sitter cancelled at the last minute," he explained, running a hand through his hair. "Had to drop my daughter off with a neighbor." Isla just nodded, her expression softening. "Daughter?" "Lily. She's 5 now," he said, a proud, tired smile on his face. "It's hard doing this with a kid," she said quietly. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. "Yeah," he said, "it is." She didn't pry, she just slid a copy of her notes across the table. "You missed the section on reinforced polymer composites," she said. "Let me walk you through it." In that small gesture, in her quiet, unwavering respect for his struggle and his ambition, Liam felt the first new support beam being bolted into place in the empty frame of his life. It was a long way from a finished structure, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt like he was building on solid ground. 7 years passed. They passed not in a gentle stream, but in a series of hard-won days and nights, each one a brick laid in the foundation of a new life. The passage of time was marked by the changing seasons viewed through the window of his small apartment, then later a slightly larger one. It was marked by the stack of finished textbooks on his shelf, by the calluses on his hands, slowly softening as he traded a hammer for a clipboard and a clipboard for a drafting pen. Most of all, it was marked by Lily's growth, from a small girl who needed him to tie her shoes to a bright, clever 11-year-old who corrected his grammar and explained the plots of television shows he didn't have time to watch. The grind was relentless. For the first 2 years, Liam's life was a brutal triptych: the construction site from dawn until dusk, night classes until 10, and the precious stolen hours with Lily in between. He operated on caffeine and sheer force of will. He learned to read blueprints not just as instructions but as a language, to see the building in 3 dimensions before the first shovel ever broke ground. Frank, true to his word, promoted him, first to foreman, where he learned to lead men, to earn their respect not through shouting but through competence. He knew their jobs because he had done their jobs. He knew the strain on their backs and the grit in their eyes. Then, after he earned his degree in construction management, Frank called him into the office. The site trailer was gone, replaced by a permanent office in a modest building downtown. Frank pushed a set of plans across the desk. It was a complex commercial redevelopment project. The architects are a nightmare, the city permits are a mess, and the budget is tighter than a gnat's arse, Frank said, leaning back in his creaking chair. You're the project manager, don't screw it up. Liam didn't screw it up. He lived and breathed that project for 18 months. It was his first taste of real power, of orchestrating the complex dance of logistics, labor, and finance, and the lead architect on the project was Isla Serrano. Their professional relationship had deepened into a formidable partnership. They were a perfect synthesis of theory and practice. She would design an elegant, ambitious, cantilevered structure, and he would figure out the practical step-by-step process to actually build it without killing the budget or the crew. They argued, they debated, they spent countless late nights in the site office, surrounded by blueprints and empty coffee cups, the air thick with the smell of paper and shared purpose. During that project, the line between professional and personal began to blur. It happened slowly, organically. It was in the way she started bringing him an extra coffee in the morning, knowing exactly how he took it. It was in the way he found himself asking about her weekend, not out of politeness, but because he genuinely wanted to know. It was in the day she found him in the office, staring at his phone, his face pale. "What is it?" she had asked, her voice gentle. "It's Lily's birthday next week," he said, his voice quiet. "Chloe, she sent a card, the first time in 3 years, just a card with cash in it. No return address." Isla didn't say anything. She just came and stood behind his chair, placing a hand on his shoulder. The warmth of her touch was steady, grounding. "What are you getting her?" she asked. "She wants this ridiculously expensive science kit, an electronics one." "I don't know," he sighed. I want to give her the world, Isla, and most days I feel like I can barely keep our little corner of it from falling apart." "You're not," she said, her voice firm. "Look at what you're doing, Liam. Look at this building. You're making something from nothing. You do it every day. You've been doing it for years. With this, and with her, she's a wonderful kid. That's not an accident." That night he went home and looked at his daughter, really looked at her, as she sat at the kitchen table, meticulously drawing a picture of a winged horse. She was happy, she was secure, she was loved. Isla was right. He had been so focused on the daily struggle that he hadn't seen the structure he had actually built. A home, a life. The romance, when it finally happened, was not a spark, but a slow, steady flame that had been burning for years. It was after the successful completion of the redevelopment project. There was a small party for the senior staff at a downtown bar. Liam felt out of place in a collared shirt and clean hands. He saw Isla across the room talking to a city councilman. She looked incredible in a simple black dress, but what struck him was how she commanded the conversation, her intelligence and passion on full display. Later they stood on the bar's rooftop terrace, looking out at the city skyline. Their finished building was prominent, its lights shining against the dark sky. "We did that," she said, a note of wonder in her voice. "We did that," he corrected her, looking at her instead of the building. In the soft glow of the city lights he could see the years of shared struggle and mutual respect reflected in her eyes. He saw his partner, he saw his future, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of fiery, desperate passion, like his memories of Chloe. It was quiet, certain, and deeply felt. It felt like coming home. 2 years later, Frank retired. He sold his controlling interest in the company not to a large conglomerate, but to Liam and Isla. They renamed it Keane and Serrano Construction. They moved into a larger office. They started bidding on bigger, more ambitious projects. They built a reputation for taking on the difficult jobs, the ones that required innovation and grit, and for finishing them on time and under budget. Liam's name, once just a number on a payroll, started to be known in the circles of developers and architects that mattered. They built a life together. They bought a piece of land in a quiet, leafy suburb and designed their own house. It wasn't a McMansion like the ones Daniel had probably favored. It was a marvel of smart, functional design, full of natural light, with a workshop for him and a studio for her. They built it themselves on weekends with a small crew of their most trusted guys. Lily, now a pre-teen, helped paint her own room. One evening, standing in the unfinished frame of their living room, Isla turned to him. "Do you ever hear from him?" she asked. She didn't need to say who. Liam shook his head, driving a nail into a stud with a single, precise blow. "Not a word, not from either of them. The divorce papers I sent to his lawyer years ago came back signed. That was it. I hear whispers sometimes. Guys on site who used to work for one of his subcontractors, rumors that his investments went sour, that his company's leveraged to the hilt." He shrugged. "It's not my world anymore, this is." He gestured around at the skeleton of their home, at the life they were building, beam by beam. He was no longer the broken man in the ruined apartment. He was an architect of his own existence. He was powerful, not because of the money he now had, but because of the foundation he had built. It was a foundation of hard work, of patience, of loyalty. He believed it was unshakable. He had no idea it was about to be tested. The past doesn't just disappear, it lies dormant, like a seed of a noxious weed, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. For Liam, the first sign that the dormant past was stirring came not as a dramatic confrontation, but as a piece of industry gossip. He was at a charity gala, an event he would have scoffed at years ago, but now attended as a necessary part of business. He was standing with a group of developers nursing a glass of scotch when he heard Daniel's name. "Total collapse," one of the men was saying, shaking his head. The guy built a house of cards on a mountain of debt, used leveraged funds to invest in high-risk offshore properties. The whole thing imploded, wiped him out. I heard the feds are sniffing around too, something about investor fraud. "What about his wife?" another man asked. "The blonde. She was always dripping in diamonds." The first man chuckled, a cruel, dismissive sound. "Gone, I hear. Left him the second the Amex card stopped working. Serves him right. He was always an arrogant bastard." Liam felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity. It was like hearing a weather report from a distant country. The news was factual, but it had no emotional impact on his climate. Daniel's rise and fall had occurred in a separate universe. He turned away from the conversation, his eyes scanning the crowd for Isla, who was across the room, effortlessly charming a potential client. Seeing her, so poised and brilliant, was like a compass recalibrating to true north. That was his world. That was his reality. He didn't think of it again until a week later. It was a Saturday afternoon. He was in his workshop, the air thick with the clean, sharp scent of sawdust. He was helping Lily, now a sharp and witty 13-year-old, build a complex model of a trebuchet for a school project. The easy back and forth between them, the shared focus on the small, intricate task, was the embodiment of the peace he had worked so hard to build. Isla was in the garden, and the sound of her laughter as she talked on the phone with her sister drifted in through the open door. It was a perfect, ordinary moment. And then the doorbell rang. Liam wiped his hands on a rag, annoyed at the interruption. They weren't expecting anyone. He walked through the house, the one he had designed and built, and opened the front door. And the universe tilted. It was Chloe. She stood on his doorstep, a ghost made of flesh and blood. The 7 years had not been entirely kind. The expensive, trend-chasing clothes she wore looked a season or two out of date. The blonde hair was still there, but it lacked its former luster. There were fine lines of stress around her eyes and mouth that her makeup couldn't quite conceal. But the biggest change was in her eyes. The arrogant entitlement was gone, replaced by a desperate, hungry look he had never seen there before. "Liam," she breathed, her voice a little shaky. She tried for a smile, a watery, pathetic thing. "Hello?" Liam's mind went utterly blank. He felt no anger, no sadness, no shock. He felt only a vast cold distance, as if he were looking at a stranger who vaguely resembled someone he once knew. He had spent years imagining this moment, playing out scenarios of rage and recrimination in his head. Now that it was here, all he felt was a profound sense of nothing. She had no power over him. The emotional wiring she had once been connected to had been ripped out and replaced years ago. "What do you want, Chloe?" he asked. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used with a subcontractor who had failed to deliver. Her smile faltered at his tone. She had clearly expected something else. Tears, perhaps, or anger she could manipulate. His cold indifference was a wall she hadn't anticipated. She wrung her hands, a gesture of manufactured vulnerability. I made a terrible mistake, Liam," she began, her voice taking on a rehearsed, pleading quality. "I know that now. Daniel. He wasn't who I thought he was. He was a monster. He built our lives on lies, and when it all came crashing down, he blamed me. He threw me out with nothing, absolutely nothing." Tears began to well in her eyes. Real or not, it was impossible to tell. "I've been staying on a friend's couch. I'm so lost. And I kept thinking of you, of this, of what we had." Her eyes flickered past him, taking in the high ceilings of the entryway, the glimpse of the sun-drenched living room beyond. She was casing the joint, assessing the value of what she had thrown away. "There is no we, Chloe," Liam said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "There hasn't been for a very long time. Dad, who is it?" Lily's voice came from down the hall. Before Liam could answer, she appeared at his side. She was nearly as tall as Chloe now, with his dark hair and Isla's intelligent, perceptive eyes. She looked from Liam's stony face to the crying woman on the doorstep. Chloe's face crumpled in what looked like genuine shock. She stared at Lily as if seeing a ghost. "Lily," she whispered. "Oh my God, look at you. You're so big." Lily's expression was one of cool, curious assessment. She had no memory of this woman, only faded photographs and the simple, honest story Liam and Isla had told her. Your mother decided she wanted a different life, and she left. There was no anger in Lily's eyes, only a teenager's sharp, unforgiving judgment. "Hi," she said, her tone polite but chilly. "Do I know you?" The question, in its brutal simplicity, seemed to hit Chloe harder than anything Liam could have said. The performance of the remorseful mother shattered. For a second, a flash of pure, venomous anger crossed her face before she masked it again with sorrow. Just then Isla appeared, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, her gardening gloves in one hand. She saw Chloe, and her entire posture changed. She didn't move to Liam's side in a possessive way. Instead, she simply stood there, a silent, unshakable presence. Her gaze met Chloe's, and in that moment, the battle lines were drawn. It was not a contest between a past love and a present one. It was a contest between a deserter and an architect. "I think you should go," Liam said, his voice final. He made a move to close the door. "Wait!" Chloe's voice grew sharp, the pleading tone replaced by a harder edge. "Liam, please, I have nowhere to go. I'm desperate. Just help me. For her sake." She gestured toward Lily, a last desperate gambit. "Her sake was the last thing on your mind 7 years ago," Liam said, the first flicker of his old anger showing through. "You have no right to use her now." He closed the door firmly in her face, the solid thud of the heavy wood echoing the finality of the act. He turned, his heart finally starting to pound in his chest. Isla was watching him, her expression full of concern. Lily was looking at the closed door, her face a mixture of confusion and a dawning adult understanding. "Is that her?" Lily asked quietly. Liam knelt, putting him on eye level with his daughter. "Yes, sweet pea, that was her." "She seemed sad," Lily said, though she didn't sound sad herself. She sounded like a scientist observing a specimen. "Some people make their own sadness," Isla said, her voice soft but firm as she came and put a hand on Lily's shoulder. Liam knew with a certainty that chilled him that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Chloe hadn't come for forgiveness. She had come for a foothold. And when pity and remorse failed to secure it, she would resort to other, uglier tactics. He had closed the door, but the ghost was no longer a memory. It was outside, and it wanted in. Liam had built his new life like a fortress, but he had underestimated the desperation of the enemy at the gates. Pity had failed Chloe, so she unsheathed her next weapon, manipulation backed by the threat of legal warfare. A week after her appearance at their home, a thick envelope arrived at the offices of Keene and Serrano Construction. It was from a law firm, one known for its aggressive, high-profile divorce and palimony cases. Liam sat in his office, the letter open on his polished concrete desk. Isla sat across from him, her face calm and focused, but her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. The letter was a masterpiece of legal fiction. It painted Chloe as a long-suffering wife, abandoned and left destitute while her husband built an empire. It claimed that since their divorce was finalized without a formal settlement agreement regarding future earnings, a deliberate oversight by Liam's first, cheap lawyer years ago, she was entitled to a significant portion of his current net worth. It spoke of emotional distress, of the pain of being separated from her child, a child she was forced to leave behind due to her fragile state. It was a work of art, turning her desertion into a tragedy for which he was financially liable. The final paragraph was the stiletto blade. It hinted at a public, messy court battle that would drag his business, his reputation, and his family through the mud. It was blackmail, dressed up in legalese. "She's not just coming for the money," Isla said, her voice low and steady. "She's trying to poison the well. She wants to tear this down." She gestured around the office at the models of their completed buildings, at the blueprints for their future. "She can't stand that you rebuilt without her and bet her." "She's underestimating us," Liam said, though a cold dread was seeping into him. A public fight was the last thing he wanted. He had spent years building a name based on integrity and reliability. A scandal like this could be devastating, scaring off conservative investors and clients. And worse, it would inevitably drag Lily into the center of a storm she didn't create. Chloe escalated. She started calling his office, leaving tearful, then angry voicemails. Then she did the one thing Liam had feared the most. She showed up at Lily's school. She didn't try to enter the grounds. She was too smart for that. She waited on the public sidewalk at dismissal time. Lily told them about it that evening at dinner, her voice carefully neutral. "That woman was there today," she said, pushing a piece of broccoli around her plate. "The one from the door. She tried to talk to me." Liam's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice tight. "She said she was my mother and that she missed me every day," Lily reported, her eyes fixed on her plate. "She said you and Isla had kept me from her, that you had told me lies." She finally looked up, her gaze meeting Liam's. "You didn't lie to me, did you, Dad?" "No," Liam said, his heart aching. "Never." "Good," Lily said, with a finality that was all Isla. Because she seemed like she was lying. Her eyes were all watery, but the rest of her face was tight, like she was mad. She took a bite of broccoli. "I told her my mum was picking me up, and I pointed at Isla's car. Then I walked away." Liam felt a surge of pride, so fierce it almost choked him, but it was mingled with a cold, rising fury. Chloe had crossed a sacred line. This was no longer about money or the past. This was an attack on his child. The builder in him, the man who had patiently laid brick upon brick, was being overtaken by the warrior who would defend the fortress at any cost. He knew he couldn't let this play out in a courtroom. He couldn't let Chloe's narrative, however false, take root. A defensive strategy was a losing one. He needed to go on the offensive. He had to dismantle her leverage piece by piece until she had nothing left to stand on. He agreed to meet her. His lawyer advised against it, but Liam was insistent. This wouldn't be a negotiation. It would be a demolition. He chose the location, a quiet, old-school bar downtown, a place of dark wood and low lighting, neutral territory. He told her to come alone. She arrived 10 minutes late, a power move. She had dressed for the part, a somber, expensive-looking dark-dressed, understated makeup, an air of sorrowful dignity. She saw him sitting in a booth in the corner and slid in opposite him. Then she saw Isla sitting next to him. Chloe's mask of composure cracked. "What is she doing here?" she hissed, her eyes flashing with genuine hatred. "This is between us, Liam. Family." "Isla is my family," Liam said, his voice as cold and hard as granite. "She is my partner in my business, in my life, and in raising my daughter. Anything you have to say to me, you say to both of us." Chloe's face tightened. She took a deep breath, visibly recalibrating her attack. "Fine," she spat. "Let's get to it then. Your lawyer saw our proposal. It's a generous offer considering the public humiliation I could cause you. Half of the company's value, a retroactive child support settlement for the pain and suffering of my absence, and a structured alimony payment for the next 10 years. Or we go to court, and I will tell everyone how you threw me and my child out, got rich and replaced me." "You left," Liam stated, the words like stones. "You left a note. You left your daughter." "A note written under duress," she shot back, her voice rising. "I was in an emotionally abusive relationship. You were cold, you were distant, you were obsessed with your dead-end job. I fled for my sanity, and Daniel took advantage of me in my vulnerable state. Any court will see that." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And I will tell them how you and your little architect friend here conspired to cut me out of the fortune that was rightfully mine. I will make you toxic, Liam. No one will want to do business with a man like you." It was a masterful performance. She had twisted the truth into a weapon aimed directly at his heart and his livelihood. He saw the trap she had laid. If he reacted with anger, he would prove her point about his temper. If he argued the facts, it would become a messy he said, she said battle. So he did neither. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. He let the silence stretch, the weight of her threats hanging in the air. Isla sat beside him, a silent pillar of support. She trusted him. She knew he had a plan. Finally, Liam spoke. "You've built your entire case on two assumptions, Chloe," he said, his voice calm and measured. "The first is that you were a victim of Daniel. The second is that your brother would have given you a better life." Chloe narrowed her eyes, wary. "He was a monster. He ruined me." "Let's find out," Liam said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. His movements were slow, deliberate. He placed it on the table between them. "You know, for all his faults, Daniel was always brutally honest, especially when he was angry." He swiped the screen and pressed a contact. He put the phone on speaker. A knot of confusion and fear began to form on Chloe's face. The phone rang once, twice. A ragged, bitter voice answered. "What?" "Daniel," Liam said. "It's Liam." There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. "Liam, what the hell do you want? Come to gloat?" "No," Liam said. "I have Chloe here. She's telling me a story about how you took advantage of her and ruined her life. She's planning on taking me to court, claiming she was a victim and that you were the villain in her life. I just thought you should hear it." The silence on the phone was thick with malice. Chloe had gone deathly pale. She stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. "A victim?" Daniel's voice came through the speaker, no longer just bitter, but laced with a terrifying, hysterical laughter. "Oh, that is rich. That is goddamn priceless. Let me tell you about your victim, Liam. Let me tell you about the real Chloe." Liam leaned back in the booth, his arm resting protectively behind Isla. He didn't look at Chloe. He just listened as the secret weapon he had been holding in reserve was finally deployed. The truth. "A victim?" Daniel's voice crackled through the phone speaker, a raw nerve of fury and self-loathing. "Chloe wasn't my victim, Liam. She was my co-conspirator. No, that's not right. She was the goddamn architect of the whole disaster." Chloe lunged for the phone, her face a mask of panic. "Don't you dare, Daniel, don't you dare!" Liam caught her wrist with his free hand. His grip was like iron. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the phone. "Let him speak," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "She's the one who was never satisfied." Daniel's voice was rising in pitch, becoming a venomous torrent. "The apartment wasn't big enough, the car wasn't new enough, my portfolio wasn't growing fast enough. She'd look at the society pages and point out women with bigger diamonds, bigger houses. 'Why can't we have that, Danny? Aren't you smart enough?' That's what she'd say." Liam could picture it perfectly. He had heard milder versions of the same refrain for years. He felt Isla's hand find his under the table, her fingers lacing with his, a silent current of strength. "Those high-risk investments, the ones that blew up in my face?" Daniel laughed again, a horrible, broken sound. "That was her. She met some sleazy fund manager at a party and came home, convinced he was a genius. She pushed me day and night. Be a man, Daniel. Take a risk for once in your life. Don't be like your brother, happy to play in the dirt." That's what she said. "Don't be like your brother." Chloe had slumped back into the booth, defeated. The fight had gone out of her. She was staring into the middle distance, her carefully constructed reality being dismantled, word by painful word, by the one person she had counted on as a silent accomplice in her victim narrative. And the fraud? Daniel's voice dropped, becoming colder, more sinister. She'll tell you I cooked the books. The truth is, she was the one spending the money before it ever existed. She had a credit card linked to the business account. I have the statements, Liam. Hundreds of thousands of dollars on clothes, on jewelry, on trips I never even went on. When the investors started asking questions, when the whole thing started to wobble, she was the one who suggested we move the remaining assets offshore. To protect us, she said, to protect her. And when the feds came calling, whose name was on the account? Mine. She had covered her tracks perfectly. She didn't just leave me when the money ran out, Liam. She drained the accounts and then she ran, leaving me to face the fire. She's not a victim. She's a predator. She'll do the same thing to you. She'll bleed you dry and then dance on the ruins. She always has. The line went dead. Daniel had said his piece. The silence that descended in the booth was absolute. It was heavier than any sound. Chloe sat frozen, her face ashen. The woman who had walked in full of righteous fury and calculated threats was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell. Her leverage wasn't just gone, it had been turned inside out, revealing the ugly truth it concealed. Her entire story, the foundation of her attack, had been exposed as a lie. Liam slowly picked up his phone and put it back in his pocket. He then reached into his jacket again and pulled out a slim legal folder. He slid it across the table. It landed with a soft, final thud in front of Chloe. "Those are divorce papers," Liam said, his voice calm and even. "Finalized, and a settlement agreement. I had my lawyer draft it years ago. I've just been waiting." Chloe stared at the folder, uncomprehending. "It offers you a one-time payment of $50,000, Liam continued. "It is not an admission of guilt. It is the price for you to disappear from my life and from my daughter's life forever. You will sign it and you will never contact us again. No calls, no emails, no waiting outside her school. You will cease to exist in our world." "50,000, she whispered, the number an insult. "Your company is worth millions." "It's 50,000 more than you deserve," Isla interjected, her voice cutting like glass. "It's more than Daniel left you with." "If you don't sign it," Liam said, ignoring the interruption, "I will take this new information to my lawyer. I will subpoena Daniel to testify in a countersuit for attempted extortion. I will use his bank statements. I will drag you through a discovery process that will expose every single lie you've just told. You will not get half of my company. You will get nothing. And you may very well end up facing criminal charges of your own. This is your only way out, Chloe. Take the money and run, just like you did before. It's what you're good at." He had her. It was a checkmate. There was no rage in his heart, no sense of glorious victory. There was only a profound, weary lightness, the feeling of a massive weight, one he hadn't even realized he was still carrying, finally being lifted. The ghost that had haunted him, the question of his own failure, the narrative she had written in that first note, it was all exorcised, burned away by the harsh, clean light of the truth. Tears were now streaming down Chloe's face, but they were not tears of remorse or sorrow. They were tears of pure, impotent rage, the rage of a cornered animal, the rage of a gambler who had gone all in on a bluff and been called. Without another word, she snatched a pen from her purse, opened the folder, and scribbled her signature on the line. She didn't read it. She just signed her name. A final, spidery act of surrender. She shoved the folder back across the table, stood up, and walked out of the bar without looking back. Liam watched her go. He didn't feel triumph. He felt relief. The kind of deep, bone-deep relief that comes after a long fever breaks. The final demolition was complete. The site was clear. He turned to Isla. She was looking at him, her eyes shining with pride and love. She didn't say, "I knew you could do it," or "You won." She simply reached out, took his hand and squeezed it. "Let's go home," she said. He nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, let's go home." They walked out of the dim bar and into the late afternoon sun. The city hummed around them, a symphony of life and commerce. Liam took a deep breath. The air didn't just feel fresh, it felt new. The weight was gone. He felt light enough to float. He had faced the ghost of his past, not with the blind rage of a wounded man, but with the cold, prepared strategy of the man he had become. He hadn't just defeated her, he had rendered her irrelevant, and in doing so, he had finally, truly set himself free. The days that followed the confrontation were marked by a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of his old apartment after Chloe had left. It was a peaceful, settled quiet, the kind that fills a well-built house after the workers have gone home. The threat was gone. The battle was over. The ghost had been vanquished, not to the afterlife, but to the irrelevance she had earned. The $50,000 check was cashed the next day. After that, there was nothing. No calls, no letters, no sightings at school. Chloe had taken the money and vanished, just as he knew she would. She had been a storm on the horizon that threatened to wreck everything, but in the end, she was just a squall that passed, leaving the air cleaner in its wake. Liam found himself moving through his life with a newfound lightness. At work, his focus was sharper, his decisions quicker. The low-level anxiety that had been his constant companion for 7 years, the subconscious fear of Chloe's return, was gone. He hadn't realized how much energy he had been expending simply keeping that fear at bay. Now all that energy was freed, channeled into his work, into his family. He and Isla never spoke of the confrontation in the bar again. There was no need. It was a chapter that was closed, a foundation that had been tested and held firm. Their relationship, already strong, settled into an even deeper level of partnership. They were a team that had faced down a threat together and emerged unscathed, their bond forged not just in creation, but in defense. A few weeks later, on a crisp autumn evening, Liam stood on the rooftop of their latest and most ambitious project. It was a 40-story skyscraper of gleaming glass and steel, a signature building that had reshaped a corner of the city's skyline. The project was nearly complete, and they were doing a final walkthrough before the official handover. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The city spread out below them like a vast, glittering circuit board. From this height, the streets were canyons, the cars were metallic insects, and the noise of the metropolis was a distant, gentle hum. The wind was clean and cold, whipping at his jacket. Isla came to stand beside him, slipping her arm through his. She leaned her head on his shoulder, her hard hat bumping gently against his. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the lights of the city begin to twinkle on, one by one. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly. "From up here, you can't see the dirt or the traffic. You just see the structure, the design." "The bones," he agreed. "You see what holds it all together." He thought about his own life, about the wreckage he had started with, the long, slow years of rebuilding, the strength of the new structure he had created. He had built it to last. Footsteps echoed behind them, and Lily joined them at the edge of the roof, her own hard hat slightly askew. At 13, she had a teenager's practiced air of nonchalance, but her eyes were wide with genuine awe as she looked out at the view. "Whoa," she breathed. "This is insane. It feels like you're on top of the world." It's just a building, Sweet Pea, Liam said, smiling. No, it's not, Lily countered, her gaze sharp and perceptive. She pointed toward the distant suburbs, a patchwork of darkening trees and glowing windows. See that little light over there? The one next to that big patch of dark, which is the park. Liam and Isla followed her finger. They could just make out a tiny warm pinprick of light in the distance. That's our house, Lily said, a quiet pride in her voice. You can see our house from here? Liam's breath caught in his throat. She was right. From the pinnacle of his professional success, the monument to his company's power, and his own ascent, they could see their home, the small, warm light in the distance. It wasn't the skyscraper that was the achievement. It was that light. It was the place they would all go back to when the workday was done. It was the real empire. He looked at Isla, her face illuminated by the dying sun, her expression full of a deep, quiet contentment. He looked at Lily, standing tall and confident between them, a testament to a promise he had made to himself on a dirty kitchen floor 7 years ago. This was his foundation. This was his structure. This was the fortress he had built, not of steel and glass, but of loyalty, patience, and a love that had been earned, not just declared. The ex-wife, the deserter, had accused him of being a man who played in the dirt, and maybe he had been. But from that dirt, from the mud and the grime and the wreckage, he had built a life that touched the sky. His true success wasn't the height of the building he stood on, but the strength of the family unit he had built from the broken pieces. He wrapped an arm around Lily's shoulders and pulled her close, his other hand finding Isla's. The three of them stood there for a moment, a family silhouetted against the vast, beautiful, and unconquerable city they called home. The past was a ghost, the future was a blueprint, but this moment, right here, was solid and real and perfect. We have work to do tomorrow, he said, his voice full of a quiet, unshakable peace. Let's go home.